Okay, a quick reminder. My question and answers video is going to be done within the next week. I'm going to try and do maybe the wrestling questions part of the video first, and that'll be coming hopefully this weekend, and then the non-wrestling questions will come the week after. So if you wanted to send me questions, go ahead and keep doing that. I've got quite a few already, so but if you want to send them in, the cutoff date will be this Thursday. So send them in by Thursday, and because that's when I'm going to start filming. So just be sure to get those questions in if you want to. Remember, it's one wrestling question, one non-wrestling question per person. So that's how that's going to work. So if you want to send in those questions, go ahead and do that. But today I kind of wanted to do a fun little thing because this kind of got sparked by the recent string of WWE pay-per-views that have been going on. Some people have told me, some fans, I'm going to assume that they're younger fans. They've told me that the string of pay-per-views past SummerSlam, so like Night of Champions, Battleground, Hell in a Cell, and Survivor Series, is the worst string of WWE pay-per-views ever. And they're some of the worst shows in company history. And I'm not going to sit here and say they were good shows. I didn't see Survivor Series, but Hell in a Cell was kind of meh. Night of Champions was meh. Except for the tag match, Battleground was meh. So I'm certainly going to agree that they were less than stellar shows, and they weren't that great, and they felt horribly put together. Like they just threw, in some cases, they just threw random crap up there to see what would stick. So yeah, I agree that they weren't the best shows. Worst of all time, though, that's a bit heavy. And again, that's why I'm going to assume that the people saying that these pay-per-views are the worst, you're probably younger than me, because I lived through the shit, okay? I lived through the really, really bad WWE pay-per-views. So I thought it'd be fun to just take a look back and poke some fun at the worst pay-per-views that the WWE's ever put on. So I'm doing the top 10 worst WWE pay-per-views of all time. I'm doing it A, to have fun, and B, to kind of highlight, you know, when people say it's like these recent pay-per-views have been the worst, I'm like, not really. These were kind of worse. these were like the low points in the WWE's pay-per-view history, at least in my eyes. Now, before anybody, complains about my list or anything like that, two things I want to make clear. If there's a show that you really hated that's not on this list, keep in mind there's probably a really good chance I didn't see it. Especially during the Cena era, there were periods where I was like, I would skip like 4 or 5 pay-per-views in a row because I just didn't give a shit. I was like, I don't need to pay all that money just to see Cena hold up the belt at the end. So there were a lot of pay-per-views during that period from 2005 to now that I skipped. So if they were really bad, there's a real good chance I missed it. So keep that in mind. Also, I have to note that Over the Edge 1999 will not be on this list. For those of you who don't know, and I'm assuming that most of you do, but I'll explain it anyway. Over the Edge 99 was the show where Owen Hart had his accident, where he fell from the rafters and unfortunately died as a result of the fall. And while that was a horrible pay-per-view experience for me personally, I remember watching that show live, I can't really make fun of that, and that's kind of the problem with it. And that's just too dark and too morose, and really it brings up too many bad memories for me personally. So I don't really want to cover that. I want to have more lighthearted fun with this. And to me, there's nothing lighthearted and fun about what happened that night. So that'll be that. So no Over the Edge 99. But with all of that said, I did pick out 10 very, very bad WWE pay-per-views throughout their history, and I hope you all enjoy my list and have fun with this video. Oh, Beware of Dog 1996. I had to include this one on the list. I remember ordering this pay-per-view back when it first happened, so I would have been 11 years old at the time, and just being thunderstruck, well, I'm sure the WWF felt thunderstruck too, by what happened, where we got the first match, which was Triple H versus Mark Marrow in the opening match. And, of course, he was Hunter Hearst Helmsley back then, to illustrate what the time period was like. And we got the first match, and that went okay, and then the lights went out, and we lost the pay-per-view feed. And technical difficulties had not been unheard of when it comes to live events of any kind before, but the fact that it took so long for it to come back was pretty astounding. And excuse me. And as a kid, obviously, I can't, being an 11-year-old kid, I'm just an impatient little ass fucker. So I was just sitting there yelling at the TV. It's like, where's the show? And blah, blah, blah. And this is the worst thing ever. Blah, blah, blah. And, as an adult now, I realize, well, that's not really the WWF's fault. I mean, Mother Nature was just a bitch and kind of struck them down. What happened was apparently they were having major weather problems, like a big thunderstorm and a lot of rain, by where the arena was, where the show was taking place. And they lost power. So they had no lights in the arena. And apparently, they continued the show while the pay-per-view feed was gone. And the audience was watching these matches in the dark with no lights, which is pretty hilarious. But what do you do in that situation? It's just it's crazy. So really, this show being the bad pay-per-view experience that it is, wasn't really the WWF's fault. It was just one of those things that happens. The pay-per-view feed came back in time for the main event, which was Shawn Michaels versus the British Bulldog. But by that point, I think so much air had been let out of the show, and there was such a disjointed feeling to everything that the main event itself didn't come off all that well. And it didn't help that they did a double pin, which I'm never a fan of that. But that was actually the first time I remember seeing that, the double pin. I think the match that they had a month later at King of the Ring 96 was much better than this one. So it wasn't even that great of a main event. And so at the end, we only had 2 matches and a big blue screen saying WWF in your house, we'll be right back, for the entire show, and that was it. And it's pretty hilarious now when I look back on it. But the thing that really makes me laugh is that 2 days later they gave us the other matches that got canceled due to the pay-per-view feed being cut. They gave us those matches for free 2 nights later. So that was cool. The problem was the matches themselves weren't that great, so it wasn't even like we missed all that much. It was Undertaker and Goldust in a casket match, which was okay. Vader versus Yokozuna, which, I don't need to tell you what that match was like. And we did have the Caribbean strap match between Austin and Savio Vega, where DiBiase left the company because his man Steve Austin lost that match, and that was pretty good. So maybe I'm being harsher on it than I should be, but it was a nice gesture on their part to give us those matches for free 2 nights later, and it did. They made up for it about as well as they could. So the reason that this one is number 10 on the list, because A, the reason it was so bad wasn't really the WWF's fault, and B, they did try to make up for it, and did about the best thing you could possibly do to make up for it. So it's not even really worth getting that angry or upset about it. I just think it's hilarious that the pay-per-view burnt out for a majority of the show. I think that was pretty funny. And yeah, it's one of those memorable pay-per-view experiences I'll never forget. So let's move on to number 9. To me, WrestleMania 13 represents such a major low point for the WWF, WWE, whatever you want to call them. Really just one of the ultimate low points in the company's history, in many ways. The buy rate for this show got beat out by WCW Uncensored, which was a throwaway pay-per-view that featured that stupid Team Royal Rumble thing that they did. The best part about that show was Sting showing up and beating the holy crap out of the NWO, but that was unadvertised. Nobody, ordered the pay-per-view knowing that that was going to happen. So to get beat out by that show really was a sign of the times, and it was this and the Raw from Germany, which was production-wise, was one of the worst put-together shows they ever did. And that got a really low rating, so it was really just a sign of, WCW was just kicking their ass at the time. And not only that, but Shawn Michaels had lost his smile, and, if you believe the knee injury, that's up to you, but he lost his smile and had to be dropped out of whatever the main event plans were, and they had no backup plan for the WrestleMania main event. So by the end of it, it just kind of looked like a thrown-together show that had no plan, and just a pile of nothing. And there was one thing on this show that clicked, one thing that delivered big time, and that was Bret Hart versus Steve Austin in the submission match, which is, to be fair, one of the best WrestleMania matches of all time. It's just, and even that, they kind of lucked into it because apparently the original plan was to do Bret versus Shawn in a rematch, and that was supposed to be the main event. But when Shawn dropped out, it really left nothing for Bret. Austin had won the Royal Rumble, but he wasn't going to go into the main event, so he was kind of left on an island. And Bret and Austin had this feud that stemmed from '96, and they'd had the match at Survivor Series, and they had their little scuffle at the Rumble. So they kind of had an unresolved rivalry that they could easily just throw that match on there and it would work. And it did. They literally had to go out there and have one of the best matches of all time to keep WrestleMania 13 from being, in my eyes, probably the worst WrestleMania of all time. There's one worse WrestleMania, which I'll get into that later on this list. But, yeah, I'm just looking up and down the card of the show. Intercontinental title match, Rocky Maivia versus the Sultan. Living proof, and you know, the Sultan, for those of you who don't know, was played by Rikishi, who was a good talent overall. It really goes to show how a shitty gimmick can hurt a good talent. Rocky Maivia, great talent, but not as Rocky Maivia. It was... I think we can all agree The Rock is infinitely better than Rocky Maivia. And so this bland blue chipper babyface that they had going with the blue ribbons and shit just wasn't going to cut it. You had a four-way tag in the opener. It was the Headbangers versus Doug Furnas and Philip LaFon, which whatever happened to them? They actually were not a bad team, but I couldn't tell you what happened to them after they left the WWE. The new there was the new Blackjacks played by Bradshaw and Barry Windham, and if you have the new anything in front of you, you're probably not going to work. I remember when there was the new Hart Foundation it was the Anvil and Owen Hart. That didn't work. I remember the new Rockers with Al Snow as Leif Cassidy. That didn't work. So if you have new in front of your name, there was also the new Legion of Doom with Heidenreich taking Hawk's place. So if you're a tag team and you have new whatever in front of your name, it's probably not going to work. So yeah, the new Blackjacks didn't work, and the Godwins were in this match as well. Were they heels yet? I don't remember. I remember laughing when they turned the Godwins heel because it was like, okay, we've got evil pig farmers. That's our gimmick. I mean, I guess that could have been like a deliverance thing, but again, this was before the Attitude Era really kicked in, so they didn't really get to go all the way with that. But yeah, it felt like a pre-show match, and it opened up the card. This is supposed to be the hot match that's going to open up WrestleMania, and it was just kind of this flat, boring tag match involving all these teams that nobody really gives a shit about. The tag title match, it was Mankind and Vader versus the Bulldog and Owen. Two heel teams going at it. Nobody cared. Goldust and Triple H had a match, which sounds like it would be a good match. It was not. It was a bad, awkward match and didn't really pay off or click in any kind of way, shape, or form. You had the Legion of Doom and Ahmed Johnson versus the Nation of Domination, some sort of stupid street fight thing where they just threw bodies around and hit each other with weapons the whole time. It was kind of a mess and not really anything that special. So I wasn't a fan of that either. And then you had the main event of Undertaker versus Sid, which had no plan put into it. They randomly threw it together because they didn't know what else the fuck to do. Again, it was just obvious at this show they did not know what to do. And I think losing Shawn really killed a lot of their plans because Shawn lost his smile. And you get this Undertaker-Sid match, and it's like, okay, at least Undertaker's going to win the title. And he did. But he did it unclean because they turned Sid face right before the match. Because he beat up Bret Hart, who had just turned heel. And then Bret Hart shows up later in the match and costs Sid the title. So Undertaker winning the title, which was supposed to be like the saving grace of this match, they failed on it because Undertaker didn't even win the belt clean. So it was like, well, fuck it. So you got this really boring main event with a screwball finish that didn't really mean anything. And perfectly indicative of this whole pay-per-view. This pay-per-view was just this black hole of nothing. It was just a nothing show. And like I said, the only thing that happened worth noting was Bret Hart versus Steve Austin, which was stupendous. Excellent. Fantastic match. And it was really because of that match that this pay-per-view is only number 9 on my list. It should be much higher on the list than that, but that match happened, so it saved it and kept it out of the top 5. So, yeah, WrestleMania 13. Turned out 13 was a very unlucky number for the WWF this year, so man, what a bad one. You've heard me talk enough about Survivor Series 91, haven't you? I already posted a big fucking video reviewing the show and talking about how bad it was. Even at 6 years old, I thought it was fucking terrible. So, I'm not going to go into too much detail about it. You know, if you haven't seen the video, I'll post a link to it in the description so you know what I'm talking about. But this show was just a mess. Fucking terrible. None of the Survivor Series really stood out or were that good. The finish in Team Piper versus Team Flair was mind-bogglingly stupid. Hogan and Undertaker coming, you know, basically halfway through the show was a mistake, and it felt like the show peaked right in the middle. Like I said, none of the Survivor Series matches were that good. The main event of the pay-per-view, they could have had Team Savage versus Team Jake. Instead, they just shortened it to a 6-man, so your main event was the Legion of Doom and the Big Boss Man versus IRS and the Natural Disasters, which is laughably terrible. So, this show was just horribly put together. It's such a mess. And kind of like WrestleMania 13, the only good thing there is to talk about is Undertaker beating Hogan for the title. That was the only thing that happened, where it's like, okay, that was pretty cool, but the rest of the show, just it was bullshit. Oh, it was so bad. So, but yeah, you've heard me talk enough about this show, so let's move on. There are not many pay-per-views that have pissed me off as much as this one did. Royal Rumble 2006. Not only was it horribly put together, but some of the booking decisions that they made pissed me off to no end. And it's still like, I still get pissed off when I think about that show. There was some horrible crap on it, like JBL doing a 2-minute job to the Boogeyman. Why did that happen? Why? There was a horrible Divas match on there. It was Mickie James versus Ashley Massaro. I don't know if anybody remembers Ashley, but it was kind of just supposed to be a stepping stone into Mickie versus Trish, which was an awesome feud, but this match was terrible. There was a random cruiserweight match on there. I couldn't even tell you who was in it. It was one of those matches where they just crammed 6 people in there, and it's like, fine, whatever. And then the Royal Rumble match came halfway through the show. It was the 4th match, and I was like, what? Why? So the 2 title matches are going to come after the Royal Rumble. And I usually think that that's a mistake to have the title match come after the Rumble because the Rumble is an hour-long match with so many components and so many factors in it that it's almost guaranteed to wear the crowd out by the time it's done. That, to me, happened in 1996 when they had Undertaker and Bret Hart follow the Rumble. That match was fucking terrible, and I think it was boring as hell. And the crowd was just dead, I think, because they just watched the Royal Rumble, so I think that's why it happened. 97, it wasn't really a problem because Shawn was the hometown boy, and they were hot for him anyway. And the casket match in 98 was really good, so that one was able to do it. You know, Rock and Punk this year, a good match, but it struggled a little bit. Maybe it should have come before the Rumble. Just saying that. But yeah, that was just a strange decision. They're going to have both world title matches come after the Royal Rumble. And the Royal Rumble match itself was good. I mean, you'd have to try to make a bad Royal Rumble. There's really no excuse for having a bad Rumble, although I have seen them do it. That 40-man one was pretty tragic. But they did some things with the Rumble that I thought were stupid. Like, Eddie Guerrero had just passed away. And they had Rey Mysterio walking around saying, it's like, come on, Eddie, help me draw a good number, Eddie. And then he draws number 2 out of the numbers. He's like, oh, you got me again, Eddie. And I don't know why. That just seemed like so tacky to have the ghost of Eddie Guerrero treated as like a character in the WWE. And of course, this is a prelude to the whole Eddie's in Hell thing that Orton was doing in the Mania build-up. And some of that got so bad that people were speculating that Eddie wasn't really dead. Because it's like, there's no way they'd be doing this if he was really dead. And I was like, I hope that's true, because this is in such poor taste and is so bad. But Anyway, so the Rumble happened. Rey Mysterio won the Rumble, and that was fine, I guess. I mean, we all know that Rey only got that push because Eddie died, right? I mean, I hate to, really put a damper on it like that, but that's why they did that. But it was the Rumble match itself was fine. But then you get the 2 title matches. The WWE title match came next, Edge versus John Cena. And it's like, okay, wait a minute, that one's not going to be the main event? Kurt Angle versus Mark Henry is going to be your main event. Okay, sure, because Cena and Edge was the WWE title match that I felt should have been saved for WrestleMania. Edge had just won the title through the Money in the Bank cash-in. He had just done the live sex celebration, which got them a huge ratings boost. And it was like, oh my god, I think they've got something with this guy. He's a heel that they built up his heat for a long period of time. He humiliated Matt Hardy, stole his girlfriend, fucked his girlfriend on live TV. He beat and humiliated Kane. He beat and humiliated Ric Flair. He was just on a roll. He was a heel that was actually having momentum, and he had finally cashed in the Money in the Bank and beat Cena. So he was like white hot as a heel, and I was like, oh my god, they've got something. They've got to get Edge to WrestleMania. So they did Cena versus Edge at the Rumble. I'm like, that's a questionable decision. I wonder what they're going to do, because Edge has got to keep the title, because there's no reason to take the belt off of him. What did they do? They took the title off of Edge and had Cena win the belt back. And this was like the zenith of my Cena hate, where I was like, motherfucker, they want to ram John Cena down our throats at the expense of the story. If you want to have Cena win the belt back, fine. I'll swallow my pride and just say, fine, okay, good, do that. But save it for WrestleMania. Don't cut Edge's legs out from under him and fuck him over like this. And that's exactly what they did. I couldn't believe it when they done that. My jaw dropped. I thought I was going to pull my hair out. It was just crazy. I cannot believe that they did this to Edge, who was their hottest heel in the company. And the only reason they did it was so they could do Triple H and John Cena at WrestleMania, a match that I did not give a shit about at all whatsoever. And I've made my feelings known about how that match turned out. It's one of the worst matches. One of the matches I hate the most in WrestleMania's history. And I was so happy that Edge got cut out of the main event just to make that match happen. And he got stuck working in a feud with Foley that was just a rehash of the Orton feud from 2004. And even with that, Edge went out there and stole the show with Foley. And it was like, ooh, made a mistake, didn't you, WWE? I was like, you could have had that guy in your main event. Just saying. And I think after WrestleMania 22, people, the WWE realized, is like, oh yeah, Edge is so good we can't ignore it anymore. I think it got to that point. But what they did here at the Rumble was inexcusable. There was no reason to do it the way they did. Even if they wanted to put Triple H in the main event at WrestleMania, it's like, okay, make it a 3-way. I don't care. Edge should be the constant. Edge needs to be the heel going into WrestleMania. And they fucked him over, and it was like, okay, fine. Then you get Kurt Angle versus Mark Henry for the World Heavyweight title. That's the main event. That's your closer. And it was just a glaring example of a dull main event, because you could see large pockets of the audience leaving while the match is in progress, clearly showing that nobody gave a shit. And of course, having to follow the Rumble and Edge and Cena, which was the bigger of the 2 title matches, nobody cared. Nobody gave a fuck. And the only reason they had them closed was so they could have Undertaker come out on a chariot and blow the ring up. Because he came out to challenge Kurt Angle, and he did one of his little hocus pocus things where he blew the ring up. I'm like, was it really necessary to blow the ring up so we had to have that shitty match just so Undertaker could blow the ring up? Alright. Sure. Okay, fine. And the chariot should have been saved for Undertaker's WrestleMania entrance, so they kind of blew their load on that one. So, yeah, this is a very frustrating pay-per-view. In addition to it has some of the disorganization of Survivor Series 91, where it's like, why is the Rumble, the big match, coming halfway through the show? Why is this stupid comedy thing happen? Why did this stupid finish happen? But to build off of Survivor Series 91, this one just pissed me off. I could not believe they did what they did. They killed something good. Survivor Series 91 was just a bad show that didn't make any sense. This show killed something good, and that made me angry, in addition to just being an unorganized mess. But, yeah, worst Royal Rumble of all time? I think so. Maybe not worst Royal Rumble match, but certainly worst Royal Rumble event, without question. Now, This is the worst WrestleMania of all time. This is another pay-per-view I talked about quite a bit when I did my rebooking WrestleManias a couple years ago. I rebooked the entire WrestleMania 11 card because good lord, it needed it. It was so bad. It was so bad, but because I already talked about it in great detail, I'm not gonna, like Survivor Series 91, there's no reason to really go into too much detail about it. But one thing I will say, a lot of people say the show was bad because of LT versus Bam Bam being the main event. I disagree. LT and Bam Bam at least was an interesting attraction. LT didn't look that great in the ring, but at least it was like, you could understand why they did it, and at least it was interesting. And it's not LT's fault that the rest of the show sucked. It's not his fault that Undertaker and Bundy went out there and laid an egg. It's not his fault that the Blue Brothers were in the opening match. It's not LT's fault that Bret Hart and Bob Backlund had one of the worst submission matches I have ever seen in my life. A match that was so bad, Bret Hart himself said it was the worst pay-per-view match of his career. Of course, he wrote that book, before WrestleMania 26. But, it's not his fault that Diesel and Shawn went out there and had a sloppy match where the fans turned on Diesel, and Shawn Michaels took one of the worst power bombs I've ever seen as part of the finish. So, this show was just a mess. And again, LT, it's not his fault that there were audio problems all throughout the show. It's, Jesus, there's so many problems with this show, so many fucking problems, and it was just a disaster from the word go. And it's a miracle that this show is not in the top 5, because the other 5 shows I picked just happened to be worse. You wouldn't be able to fathom that, but yes, the other 5 shows that I picked for this list are actually worse. But as far as WrestleManias go, there is no doubt in my mind that this one, WrestleMania 11, is the absolute worst. Judgment Day 2004, The Great American Bash 2004, and Armageddon 2004, or as I like to call them, the Unholy Smackdown trilogy, because this was when the WWE was doing the brand exclusive pay-per-views between Raw and SmackDown, and these 3 shows were horrendously bad, to the point that they don't get the reputation that they deserve for being as bad as they are. So I'm going to assume that I'm the only person that really saw them, because they are so awful. There's so many things on these shows that were just so bad. At Judgment Day, you had Mordecai's debut, which didn't really amount to anything. You had Booker T versus The Undertaker in a feud where Booker T went to a voodoo lady to get a bag of magic dirt. It reminds me of Pirates of the Caribbean. I got a jar of dirt. I got a jar of dirt. I can't remember if this pay-per-view happened before that movie. I don't remember. I think it came before the movie, so okay, maybe they weren't ripping them off. But, anyway, they did that feud, and they did these stupid segments where Booker T was going to a voodoo lady to get this magic bag of dirt, and then he throws it in Undertaker's face, and it does nothing. So it's like, so what was the point of all that? It's like, all right, magic hocus pocus bullshit is stupid, but what was the point of doing all those segments if there was going to be no payoff to it? So it was just bad TV for the sake of bad TV. And then you get to Great American Bash 04, which had like a horrible Sable versus Tori Wilson match, a Hardcore Holly versus Mordecai in a terrible match, Kenzo Suzuki versus Billy Gunn. So it was like the Attitude Era cast-offs versus the new guys that weren't going to amount to anything. That's what those matches were like. And the main event of the show, the main event of Great American Bash 04, was The Undertaker versus the Dudley Boys in the Concrete Crypt match, which might be the worst match of Undertaker's career because the setup was stupid. Paul Heyman abducted Paul Bearer and was going to kill him by burying him in cement if Undertaker didn't lie down and do the job for the Dudley Boys. And yet the WWE let him set up this little concrete killing machine. I don't understand it. So I guess the WWE was promoting murder. I don't know. It was terrible. Whatever they were going for, it was awful. Just beyond terrible. And that might be, like I said, that might be the worst match of Undertaker's career. It's either that or the Hell in a Cell match with Boss Man at 15. Mania 15, that is. And then the next Smackdown pay-per-view was No Mercy. And that one actually wasn't bad. You know, Kurt Angle had come back from injury, and Big Show had come back from injury, and Eddie was off kind of doing his own thing, and Booker and Cena were having like a best-of-5 series for the U.S. title, which wasn't great, but at least it was something. So it felt like, you know, they had Paul London and Billy Kidman feuding, which wasn't a feud that made a whole lot of sense, but at least it was a cruiserweight feud that didn't involve the title. So it looked like, okay, maybe SmackDown's getting their shit together. Maybe all the pieces are coming into place. Because I think one of the reasons that Judgment Day and Great American Bash were as bad as they were is that after WrestleMania 20, they lost Lesnar. They lost Kurt Angle to injury. They lost Big Show to injury. So you had Eddie Guerrero as WWE champion, and he had nobody to work with, which is why JBL was really put into that spot. It also didn't help that the storylines were just fucking stupid. But, you know, I think those guys being gone really hurt it a lot. So by the time No Mercy rolled around and Kurt Angle and Big Show were back, it looked like, okay, maybe they're getting this shit together. Maybe it's going to be fun. Then we get to Armageddon. Last pay-per-view of the year. We have Kurt Angle versus Santa Claus. That was a match. You have Big Show beating Team Angle in a 3-on-1 handicap match, which didn't really amount to anything. Remember when Mark Jindrak and Garrison Cade were like aligned with Kurt Angle? You had Charlie Haas involved with a love triangle with Dawn Marie and Jackie Gata, and then he turns heel on them at the end of the match because he was a special guest referee. But then later in the show, he's a babyface because he's tagging with Hardcore Holly, because I think they were tag champions at the time or something. They were a tag team at least. It was excuse me. I didn't care. It was just a mess. You had John Cena versus Jesus in a horrible match to get revenge on, you know, Cena had to get revenge on Jesus because Jesus stabbed him in a nightclub or something. Which, trust me, its execution was way less cooler than I made it sound. That actually sounds pretty hardcore, but it didn't go anywhere and the match was terrible. So, just awful pay-per-views all around and really indicative of how bad SmackDown had gotten. And the saving grace of all three shows was the WWE title match that involved JBL and Eddie Guerrero. That was the saving grace. And for all the flack that JBL gets for being WWE champion and winning the belt too soon, which I agree with, he did win the belt too soon. But I look at those shows, I was like, fuck it, he carried SmackDown on his back. When everything, because Eddie's title reign didn't really work out because he had nobody to work with. And then, you know, Angle was gone, Big Show was gone, Lesnar was gone. JBL took nothing and carried SmackDown on his back and did the best that anybody could possibly ask of him to make that show work. And his match with Eddie at Judgment Day is a match that I looked at and was like, well, that's going to suck. And I watched it. It's actually one of my favorite matches of all time. And people say it's because of the Eddie Guerrero blade job. And I'm like, well, yeah, because going into that match, I was like, no way Eddie's dropping the belt to JBL. That would be stupid. It was like a Cena and Sheamus thing where it was like, okay, Cena can't lose the belt, and if he does, it's stupid. And that's kind of what it was. Of course, they did have Sheamus beat Cena for the belt, and everybody was like, wow, that's stupid. So anyway, they have this match, and then Eddie gets busted open like crazy, and by the end of the match, I'm like, I'm concerned for Eddie's safety, so I'm like, okay, seriously, wrap this match up, because Eddie's going to, you know, this could get very bad if you don't wrap this match up soon. And by the end of it, I was like, oh my god, JBL might win the title. And it took this non-dramatic, you know, uninteresting match, and it all of a sudden became a dramatic thrill ride. So, major credit to both Eddie and JBL for being able to do that with that match. And then they had the bull rope match at Great American Bash, which was a good match. I really liked the finish, how JBL won the belt from Eddie. I thought that was actually a really clever way to actually do the title change, even if it did come too soon for JBL's character. It looked like, it kind of was indicative of what JBL's character was like, though, where it was like this slimy, you know, lucky, cheating bastard that kind of lucks his way into victory, or he cheats his way into victory or whatever, and he can't beat anybody fair and square to save his life. And then at Armageddon 04, the main event was Undertaker, Booker, Eddie, and JBL for the title, which was a pretty good four-way overall. And Eddie worked his ass off in that match. Eddie really worked hard to tear it down in that match. So overall, it was the Eddie JBL matches that kind of saved these pay-per-views from being completely terrible. The Bull Rope match at Great American Bash should have closed, but that Concrete Crypt match is just, I still can't get over how awful that match is. If you have not seen that match, go see it. It's one of the worst matches of all time. Like, I've seen dumb gimmick matches from WCW that are not as bad as this. To me, the Concrete Crypt is on par with, like, the Chamber of Horrors and shit like that. It is awful. Awful match. And all three of these pay-per-views are awful for various reasons. Just so much stupidity, so much emptiness, and it just felt like SmackDown had nothing going for it. And, man, these are easily some of the worst pay-per-views that WWE's ever done. And to me, it was because these shows are so bad that they ultimately decided, it's like, let's not do brand-exclusive pay-per-views anymore. So, but it wasn't the nail in the coffin. I'll get to that in a little bit. But when you look at shows like this, it kind of became like, yeah, they shouldn't do brand-exclusive pay-per-views anymore. Even though if you're doing the brand split, to me, the goal should be to have brand-exclusive pay-per-views, but they could never get to a point where both brands were putting on good shows. And this was the worst. I mean, these SmackDown shows were horrendous. But, man, I look at shows like that and I just think, man, thank God they don't do those brand-exclusive shows anymore. Because could you imagine SmackDown trying to do brand-exclusive shows now? It would, it'd be awful. King of the Ring 1995 is one of the most notoriously awful pay-per-views of all time. And it's mostly very simple. I shouldn't even have to explain it all that much. First of all, the main event of this pay-per-view was WWF Champion Diesel and Bam Bam Bigelow versus Sid and Tatanka. That was your main event. I cannot tell you how little of a fuck I gave about that match. Who cares? Especially since the Sid and Diesel title matches weren't that great either, and not really worth getting all that excited about. So a tag match with Tatanka and Bam Bam Bigelow thrown in the mix, that's not going to excite me too much either. So you had a nothing main event. And then you had the King of the Ring tournament, which was, the past 2 years was used as a display to get Brett back into the main event scene and make him look really good in the victory, and to get Owen Hart into the main event scene and set him up for his big title match with Brett at SummerSlam. All of those were very good, and, you look at this tournament, you've got Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker in this tournament. Logically, you've got to be thinking one of them is going to win it. And if it were up to me, it would have been Michaels, because they were going to set up Michaels to eventually win the title at WrestleMania 12. So to me, it would have made sense to give Michaels this big victory and just put him on the path to ultimately winning the WWF title. That didn't happen. Oh, and Undertaker didn't win either. The winner was Mabel. Mabel, yes, King Mabel, one half of Men on a Mission. That was your winner. Viscera, for those of you, younger fans, he was Viscera. He was also Big Daddy V in ECW, in case you need a reminder of that. That guy won the King of the Ring tournament, and good God, I can't even fathom what they were thinking going into that. They probably thought we want to give Diesel another opponent, but fuck. Was the well really that dry that they had to throw Mabel at him? It's unfathomable. And Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, I talked about it, they didn't even make it past the first round. So you think the two most popular guys in the tournament, and they don't even make it past the first round. Shawn Michaels wrestled Kama Mustafa to a time limit draw, and Undertaker got beat by Mabel, which was like a huge what the fuck right there. I remember reading the WrestleCrap review of the pay-per-view, and Undertaker jobbed to a kick to the head, and I'm like, isn't it sad how whenever Undertaker would lose a match before this, like the entire world would have to fall on top of him, and you need like 10 people to interfere? Here, Kama interfered, and he jobbed to a kick to the head, and it's like, okay, I'll buy that, and But yeah, that was just stupid. So who faced Mabel in the finals? It was Savio Vega, who was a newcomer. I mean, he had been Quang under the mask, another shitty gimmick. He had been Quang, but they unmasked him. Of course, not telling anybody. They just did it. And called him Savio Vega, and this was his debut with the company. And he was entered into the tournament. Now, I believe he took Razor Ramon's place because Razor was hurt. I believe that's how it went down. And he faced somebody on the pre-show, the free-for-all or whatever, to earn his spot into the tournament. And then he won 2 matches to get to the finals, and then, of course, he lost to Mabel. So, not only did Mabel win the tournament, but you had, like, a no-name in the finals. Instead of putting, like, a Shawn Michaels or an Undertaker there to get people really invested in it, you put some no-name that we've never heard of. And it was like, oh, Jesus Christ, that is so terrible. Again, I don't understand what Vince was thinking here when he made these decisions. I guess he thought, I just want a big guy in the main event, and that's all the thought they put into it. The best thing about this show, was the Kiss My Foot match between Bret Hart and Jerry Lawler, where Bret won and he made Lawler kiss his own foot after Lawler had been walking through manure for 3 weeks. Because that was kind of a thing they were doing on Raw, where he would like walk through dirt and manure and all these other things. And it was very Bobby Heenan-esque, the way that Lawler got his comeuppance. It was a laugh, and that's all it was. That was the best thing on the show, was a joke. And it's like, yeah, it's funny that Lawler took the fall, and they did that bit at the end, but even that, it's like, who really cares? Oh, God, the show was so bad. And really, as bad as 1995 was, and 1995 was really bad, a bad year for wrestling in general, this pay-per-view was the worst. Worse than WrestleMania 11. Just an ultimate low point in quality for the WWF, WWE. Just really, really awful. Yeah, no surprises here. ECW December to Dismember, which was put on by the WWE in 2006, from the moment it happened, gained a reputation for being one of the worst pay-per-views of all time, if not the worst pay-per-view of all time. And when I was putting this list together, that was immediately put into the number 1 spot, because as bad as a lot of the other pay-per-views on this list are, this one was a disgrace not only to the WWE, but also to ECW, and it was really the unfortunate side effect of what I thought might happen when WWE revived ECW. I felt like that's not going to work. WWE's big budget, glitz and glamour. ECW, part of the appeal of ECW was that it was roughneck, piece of shit wrestling. And that was the appeal of it, was that it was like, you felt like you were going to this horrible dive, and it was like the strip club of professional wrestling. So mixing that with the WWE, to me, just wouldn't work. And ultimately, Vince decided to put on his version of ECW rather than putting on a product that's true to the spirit of the original ECW. And it wasn't good. And by this point, it was obvious that, any hope that people had for this new ECW brand to really work, this show pretty much dashed those hopes. Kurt Angle was added to the brand, but he had already left and gone to TNA by this point, so that left a gaping hole. And then they got around and was like, all right, we're doing this ECW exclusive show. And I remember when they said that, I looked at the roster and I was like, they don't have enough to sustain a full pay-per-view. They really didn't at the time, and it didn't help that the main event was an Elimination Chamber match, which had 6 people in it. And that was like half their roster right there. So how the hell are they going to be able to put together an entire pay-per-view with this? The best match on the show, the only good match on the show, was the Hardy Boys versus Eminem in the opening tag match. And none of those guys had anything to do with ECW. either it's past or well, maybe. Did Joey Mercury work for ECW? I don't remember. But if he did, he wasn't a big name for it. But these guys, they had no connection to ECW either in its past or even the WWE version of it. They were not members of the ECW brand. They were just put there just to fill out this pay-per-view because, God, they needed something. The show needed something. So the show peaked at the first match, unfortunately, because it was just it was a really good tag match. And the big thing about that is that the two teams went on to have a rematch at Royal Rumble 2007 and were part of a four-way ladder match at Armageddon, I believe. Was that right? Yeah, they were. It was them, London and Kendrick, and Regal, and whoever Regal's partner was at the time. I'm drawing a blank there. I'm going to feel stupid when I remember. But anyway, the two teams were part of a four-way ladder match in an Armageddon. Actually, that was Armageddon 05, wasn't it? No. Whichever show it was that had Undertaker and Mr. Anderson in the Last Ride match, that was the one that had the four-way ladder match. So, there's that show, and then there's Royal Rumble 07. So if you want to see these two teams face each other, go check out those shows, because those are better examples of it. Don't even waste your time with this. Even for this one match, it's not even worth it. It's so not worth it. And you look over this card, and it's indicative of how barren this ECW roster really was. Not only that, but just how Vince's idea of what he wanted to do with ECW completely went against the spirit of what ECW was all about, which was this rebel, hard-nosed, hardcore promotion that broke all the rules and spat in the face of anything that was, let's be honest, anything that was WWE or big budget or, WCW, anything like that. It was the Rebel brand, and Vince's idea of that was basically almost like Sunday Night Heat, the show, it felt like. And the guys that he pushed and the guys that he put on that brand and wanted to put in big positions just didn't fit with what they were going to do, what they should have done. And I was thinking about the card of this pay-per-view because, like I said, I knew right away this was going to be my number one worst. And aside from the opening tag match and the main event, which I'll get into that in a little bit, I could not remember a single match that happened on this card. I had to look it up and write the matches down just so I knew what was coming, so I knew what to talk about. Balls Mahoney versus Matt Striker in a Striker's Rule match where Balls Mahoney went over. Elijah Burke and Sylvester Terkay, remember him, versus the FBI, which, I don't know why, but the FBI at Christmas time just makes me think of Die Hard. It's like, you wanted a Christmas miracle, Theo, I give you the FBI. So, I assumed that Hans Gruber was happy with this match, but I was not. You had Daivari versus Tommy Dreamer, where Daivari went over, and I'm seeing a pattern here. Kevin Thorne and Ariel, who, for those of you who don't know, Kevin Thorne also played Mordecai. It was the same guy. I think his name's like Steve Fertig, or so Kevin Fertig, maybe. I'm sorry, I forget the guy's real name. But he also played Mordecai, so it's kind of sad that this guy is featured on 4 out of the top 5 worst pay-per-views in WWE history. I didn't plan it that way. It just sort of. Actually, was he at Armageddon? No, he was gone by Armageddon. So, okay, so he's only in 3 of the top 5, so never mind. But it was Kevin Thorne and Ariel versus Kelly and Mike Knox. Remember when the new ECW started and they had Kelly strip every week? And she was like, the funny thing about Kelly, to show how useless she was, she couldn't even strip right. Like, her stripping wasn't even, like, that sexy. It was just pathetic. I'm sorry. And so nobody cared about this match. Thorne and Ariel went over. And the pattern I saw in these random, and I do mean random, mid-card matches is that except for Balls Mahoney, Balls Mahoney was the only ECW guy that went over. The only, ECW original guy that went over, or, everybody else, it was just a bunch of WWE guys they wanted to give a push to, like Elijah Burke. And Burke had talent. I liked him better as the Pope in TNA, but that didn't work out either for whatever reason. And Sylvester Terkay, so neither of them worked out, but they got the win anyway. Daivari, what the hell was he doing on this show? Kevin Thorne and Ariel, vampire gimmick. For some reason, they can never do a vampire gimmick well. Even though vampires were like the in thing for so long, mainly because of Twilight. But, they also screwed up with Gangrel too. But No ECW originals went over, which really kind of showed me. And my friend James Walsh over at Wrestling Epicenter, he theorized that maybe Vince ran ECW the way he did because he wanted to stop the ECW chants. He wanted to put on a show that nobody would chant ECW for, and he just wanted to kill it and be done with it forever. Whether or not that's what Vince's intentions were, I don't know. But this show is just empty of anything. And again, it just spits in the face of ECW's legacy as a whole. And then we get to the main event. You want to talk about shitty main events. Oh boy. Bobby Lashley versus The Big Show, who was the ECW champion. Test, Hardcore Holly, CM Punk, and Rob Van Dam in an Extreme Elimination Chamber match for the ECW title. Now, what went wrong here? You're looking at this match. Big Show's the ECW champion. And if you want to have any kind of shred of dignity and to give the fans anything to be happy about, you'll either give the belt to Rob Van Dam, who's like the big ECW mainstay that they all love, but that probably wasn't going to fly because he kind of blew his opportunity when he got caught with marijuana earlier in the year. So it's like, all right, maybe Rob Van Dam shouldn't get it. But the other option was CM Punk. Now, of all the new guys that they brought into this new ECW brand, Punk was the one guy that looked like he belonged, like in an ECW show. It's like this guy, because he goes against everything that's WWE, and that's why he fit. It's like he is an ECW molded. He just looks like an ECW guy, and he said it himself. He's a Paul Heyman guy. So he looked like he belonged in kind of that crew of misfits. So if they wanted to do this well, they would have had Punk win the belt. CM Punk was the first one eliminated, and that to me was like, I don't know if Vince was just trying to piss off the smart marks. I don't know if Vince just didn't like him and he wanted to go with the bigger guys. I don't know what it was, but it was a dumb decision because after that, it was like the match was just a snowball rolling straight to hell. From it just continued to get worse and worse. And then Rob Van Dam was the third one eliminated. So your final three were Bobby Lashley, The Big Show, and Test. Wow. Wow. That is so bad. And again, it goes against, it was like Vince didn't even want to take ECW's legacy into consideration. He just wanted to do whatever he wanted to do. And the fans did not like it very much. I remember sitting there watching it and thinking they're chanting, I watched it and they were chanting, "Where's our refunds? This match sucks." I mean, the one that got me was "Where's our refunds?" That's that one's pretty telling. That one's pretty telling. They had Paul Heyman go out there in the middle of the show and kill time, and the fans were not very receptive to him either. And this whole ending was so just awful. And it didn't help that the show didn't even go full 3 hours. I think it went barely over 2 hours, if I recall. And that was with a long Bobby Lashley celebration that the fans did not give a shit about. Why you would market Bobby Lashley as your ECW champion, again, shows either Vince didn't understand ECW or he just didn't care and just wanted to push whatever he wanted to push. And he liked Bobby Lashley for his body, and that was it. But this show was damaging. Like I said, not only did it hurt the legacy of ECW, not only was it the worst show that the WWE's ever produced, I think it killed the brand extension pay-per-views. I think this was the show that made the WWE realize, is like, all right, we can't do brand exclusive pay-per-views anymore. So they went to tri-branding. I think Backlash 07 was the first one that was tri-branded, as they said. And then ECW after that just kind of, little by little just slowly faded away into nothing. And actually the brand extension as a whole is pretty much dead now, so it doesn't even matter. But it was bad. And Paul Heyman lost his job over this. He either got sent home or he went home. I don't remember which. But he stopped working for the WWE after the show. He was kind of the scapegoat for the show being as bad as it was. And I don't think nobody outside of the WWE blames Heyman for the show, because I can just tell just by looking at it, it's like, he didn't write this shit. There's no way he did. Oh my god, so terrible. But yeah, this show was so damaging on so many levels. And it's the worst pay-per-view that the WWE's ever put on. And it reflected in the buy rate, too. It was the lowest buy rate that they've ever done. If I remember reading that. I think that that's true. And it almost doesn't count because you look at how empty this card is. It's like, well, they didn't have anybody. I mean, it was almost like Sunday Night Heat got a pay-per-view. And it was just a train wreck. It was a bad idea. It was a misfire in every sense of the word. And my pick for the worst pay-per-view in WWE history. So that's my list, the top 10 worst pay-per-views in WWE history. Hope you all enjoyed it. And stay tuned for more. The question and answer videos are coming along, and I'll see you all later.